Our mission statement as a church is to help everyone take their next step closer to Jesus. And hopefully that's you, and hopefully that's today, and hopefully that's our graduates as we launch them onto the next chapter of their lives. We're in a series called No Other Gospel. We started it last week, and if you didn't hear last week's sermon, I would encourage you to go back and listen. The speaker is very thoughtful, articulate, and good-looking, and you should go back and hear what he has to say. But it really did set us up. It was me, by the way. It really did set us up for what we're talking about this week, the idea that our salvation is just simply grounded in Jesus Christ. We're so tempted to make it about other things, but it's all about Jesus. And so what we're doing in this series is we're going chapter by chapter through the book of Galatians, finding that central concept to really draw out and anchor our lives and anchor our relationship with God, which is going to have effects on every other aspect of who we are, how we think, how we identify, how we interact with others. It's just tremendously valuable to life as we know it. How many of you have seen Saving Private Ryan? All right, pretty good number. It came out before most of you guys were born. Suffice it to say, if you haven't seen the movie, Tom Hanks and a band of brothers go to save Matt Damon. It happens in a lot of movies, by the way, with Matt Damon. He's always being rescued, whether it's Interstellar or what's the Martian one. Anyway, they go to save Matt and Damon. Matt Damon is Private Ryan, and it's just this slog through the enemy lines, and they finally get to where Private Ryan, Matt Damon, is. And there's been, I think at this point, 6 members of the group that have died trying to get to Private Ryan so that they can pull him off the front line so he doesn't die. And right at the end of the movie, Tom Hanks dies. But as he's dying, he has enough time to pull Matt Damon close and whisper to him Tom Hanks' final words, John Miller's final words. And he pulls Matt Damon in and he says, "Earn this. Earn this." Meaning that all the sacrifice that has been made to rescue you and give you the opportunity the rest of your life, you need to earn it. I mean, 6 people have died. This is a huge sacrifice that has happened, and Tom Hanks is about to die too. Earn this. Now, the ending of the movie is moving. Like, when you watch that, you're like, I will earn it, Tom Hanks. I'm going to live my life better from now on. I'm going to make it count. I'm going to do something with my life. You're watching a movie, and even though the movie's fiction, you're still feeling that inspiration to go out and live your life better than you need to. But the more I think about that ending has never sat well with me. Now, I realize that sounds strange. Like, what do I know about making movies? Steven Spielberg, made this wonderful film. What do I know? Why does the ending not sit well? And I think it's this. Imagine how heavy it would be to know that you carry the sacrifice of 6 different people in your life going forward. How heavy would that be? Would you be wandering around like thinking, I don't know what to do today. I think I'm just going to watch Netflix and sit down on your couch. And would you think, well, Tom Hanks died, so I could watch Netflix? I don't know. I'm not sure I should do that. Would you be like eating ultra-processed Doritos and thinking, I better not eat these because Tom Hanks died so that I could live my life? I mean, is this what Tom Hanks would want me to do with my life? Now, I say that, and some of you hear echoes of your relationship with Jesus. Jesus died. We commemorated his sacrifice with the communion that we took earlier. Do I want to walk around my life doing X or Y, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a sin or whether it's just kind of like, quote unquote, wasting our lives? Do I want to do this? Because if I'm doing this, maybe I'm not earning it. Now, those decisions may be good to make. It may not be good to spend your life watching Netflix and eating Doritos, as fun as that is. But as good as those decisions are, if you have to come at those decisions from a place of obligation, if Matt Damon always has the shadow of Tom Hanks over his choices and over his decisions, he's living a life of obligation, not freedom. This is incredibly difficult, I think, for Christians to believe. Because as much as we want to add something to the salvation formula, like we talked about last week, we talked about Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. As much as we have to remind ourselves that nothing else goes in that blank, we have to remind ourselves that we don't have to add anything to salvation either. That we don't earn our relationship with God after the fact. At no point do we earn our relationship with God. It is a free gift. No strings attached. If we are living a life of obligation, feeling like, well, I better do this thing because Jesus died for me, then we're not really living in freedom. We're not really living in the gospel. But some of you are like, whoa, wait a second, Patrick, there needs to be transformation. There needs to be growth. There needs to be improvement. Where are we going to find the impulse to do those things? Because what we're doing when we add something afterwards is we're kind of doing a buy now, pay later sort of salvation. We're doing like, I'll be paying off my salvation for the next 30 years. I'll be earning it for the next 30 years. And that's not what Jesus wants from us either. We're jumping in the deep end here. Either salvation is a generous offer from God or there are strings attached. Those are the only two choices that we have. Either it's a generous offer or there are strings attached. And some of you are thinking, well, but what about the changes that need to happen? If we don't feel burdened and obligated to make changes, then we're just going to sit around watching Netflix and eating Doritos. Not true. And Paul's got something to say about that in Galatians chapter 2. See, we like to do this thing on the front end where we say Jesus and some things equal salvation. I told you we were jumping in the deep end. We're about to really jump in the deep end. The some things that Paul the Apostle is writing about is this particularly, he talks about this topic of circumcision. And it's such a funny thing to be like, we're talking about circumcision on Sunday morning. I don't want you to Google it, but if you don't know what circumcision is, you know why this is, you don't know why this is awkward to talk about. What was going on is that there were people to whom Paul's writing that said Jesus saves as long as you have a little surgery. The men have a little surgery. Jesus will save you, but you have to have a little surgery in order to be saved. And you're thinking, well, that's such a strange thing to believe, but it was all through the Old Testament. It's talked about extensively in the Old Testament book of Leviticus. And so Paul comes along and says, Jesus, but nothing equals salvation. And other folks come in and say, well, that's not quite true. If you really want to be dedicated, if you really want to prove yourself to Jesus, you need to do Jesus plus some things. And in this case, circumcision. And Paul's going to have some cutting things to say about circumcision. This is the joys of preaching textually, by the way, is that you're just going to talk about subjects that maybe you would avoid otherwise. There's a subgenre of children's books that try to help children deal with hard topics. So I saw a couple of these this week, and I thought this was kind of interesting. It feels a little dark, but Danica, Panica, and the Sharp, Scary Needle, that's what you would read to your kids if they were about to get a shot. By the way, the cover of that book makes me more scared of getting shots. She's in her bed, and there's like this stranger coming at her with a needle. It's super scary. Like the other one is super heavy, just super heavy. Can you imagine reading to your children a child's book about divorce? And guess what? You got 2 homes now, and that means 2 Christmases and 2 Thanksgivings. Like it just feels, it's very heavy. I thought if I were going to write a children's book about circumcision, it maybe would be something like this. This is what I came up with. Circumcision, fun for everyone. The not-so-scary scalpel, right? Yeah, I kind of wondered if you'd appreciate that, and you do not appreciate it the way I hoped you would. That's fine, no problem at all. Paul's teaching, hey, Jesus, the gospel, the good news, is that you can be forgiven of your sins, and there are no strings attached. That Jesus took on this obligation, this responsibility, and he brings to you salvation, no strings attached. Some people were coming in behind Paul, and they were like, there is one string attached in particular, and it's this circumcision. Now, there were other aspects to it. Some people were saying you got to eat kosher, and you got to keep some of the elements of the Old Testament law that they all were very familiar with. And Paul's like, no, it's just Jesus. Now, it's interesting because the people to whom Paul is writing had bought into this idea, like, okay, yeah, Jesus plus circumcision. And Paul's like trying to say, no, why are you guys trying to add to it? And I have the question of why in the world would someone want to add something to the gospel? Why are we tempted to add things to the gospel? Why are we so tempted to put stuff in that blank spot? You would think that if Paul comes along and says there's no strings attached, it's a free gift, they would be like, yes, throwing parades. If Paul said you don't have to get circumcised, you think all the guys in the room would be like, woohoo, that's great, that's wonderful. Why in the world are they so excited to add stuff back into the gospel? Why are we so tempted to add things, especially hard things, to the gospel? If you showed up to work tomorrow and your boss said, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. We wanted to give you a pay raise and a better office and a promotion, and you're going to get better health benefits. You're thinking, oh, okay, well, what do I have to? Oh, nothing. In fact, you're going to work fewer hours and you'll have more vacation and less responsibility. You'd be like, I'm missing something here. I'm missing something. That sounds too good to be true. You would say, what's the catch? And if your boss came along and said, well, there actually is this thing. You have to have this surgery. You'd be like, there it is. There is the catch. And I think people heard the gospel, and it was such good, refreshing news that it's hard to accept the fact that this gift has been given to us freely. We're always wondering, is there something more? Is there a catch? Is there something going on? There's a lot of complex reasons, emotionally complex reasons. I think some people want to control God by adding stuff to this formula. I think some people want to say, God, you have to forgive me because I've done all these things. I've gone to church every single Sunday. I give to charity. I make sure I walk old people across the road so that they don't get hit by cars. I've done all these good things. God, you have to save me. And God's like, that's not the formula. I think there's some people who want to control others. They want church to be a place where everyone looks alike and acts alike and dresses alike and votes alike and eats alike. And so we add a little something to this salvation formula rather than just accepting the fact that, like Paul says, it's just this free gift. If the gospel really is Jesus plus nothing equals salvation, it sounds too good to be true. So when people come along and says it's Jesus plus circumcision, they're like, yeah, that sounds right, because that's a hard thing. And I think that is exactly what this gift somehow deserves. Now, they were saying, just read the book of Leviticus. It's all there. And Paul was saying, hey, I actually heard this directly from the guy who inspired Leviticus. There's been an update. So you need to relax with that. And Paul's going to talk about this subject later. So we're not going to all unwind it all right now. But what we're going to see is that Paul, to illustrate the fact that this is truly a free gift, he tells an unflattering story about another apostle named Peter. It's really interesting. Like, it's such a strange move, but it's actually pretty genius. So if you have your Bibles, turn to the book of Galatians, chapter 2. Book of Galatians, chapter 2, verse 11. Galatians 2, verse 11. Should be on the screen as well. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face. I, being Paul, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. It's a great story set up. It's conflict and drama and intrigue. There's a whole juicy story. It's like your favorite coworker coming to you and being like, oh, I have something to tell you. You're like, tell me, I want to hear it. I'm all ears, Paul. But first of all, who's Cephas? Where did this guy come from? Who's Cephas? You want to do a little Bible trivia? All right, let's do a little Bible trivia. You guys are good Church of Christ folk. Who's Cephas? Peter, but why is Paul calling him Cephas? Does anybody know? Oh, come on. Peter's real name is Simon. Very good. And Jesus gave him the nickname Peter, which means rock. I mean, Rocky. It literally would have been his name. He would have been like, yeah, Rocky. And we don't know exactly why Jesus gave him that name. We have no idea if it was a compliment or an insult. I mean, it could have kind of gone both ways. Cephas is actually the Aramaic form of the nickname Peter. And Aramaic was what everybody spoke in their homes and their houses. We know that Hebrew people spoke Hebrew, and of course, New Testament was written in Greek, but Aramaic was the language of the house. Like if you're just talking to your family and friends, those of you that have immigrant parents or grandparents, and they speak another language, sometimes they had like loving second language nicknames for you from the old country. My dad, international man of mystery, but you didn't know this, I've told you many times, was born in Scotland to Irish parents, and some of his family spoke Gaelic. And so every once in a while, my dad would mix like a little Gaelic word in there. You should ask him after church. He would love to have a bunch of people talk to him and say, will you speak a few Gaelic words? He would love that. I really encourage you to do that. He likes people, and he likes a lot of attention. So basically what Paul is doing is he's using kind of a loving nickname, familiar nickname for Peter. He's using the friendly term. Now, by the way, we pronounce it Cephas. Does anybody know how it's actually pronounced? It's actually pronounced Kephas. It's a harsh K, Kephas. But I'm just going to say Cephas because that's how everybody pronounces it, and it would be weird to change it now. But Paul's using this nickname for Peter, and I think that's significant. I don't want to read too much into it, but I feel like Paul is signaling, hey, I'm telling a hard story, but I want you to know I have affection for this person, this difficult story that I'm about to tell you about this guy named Peter. And then he writes, I opposed him to his face. Woo, okay. Maybe we need to do more of that occasionally once in a while. I opposed him to his face, and it says, because he stood condemned. I think that's an important word. Remember last week, we talked about the metaphor that Paul used of rescue, and we used the illustration of Ryder Williams rescuing the 10-year-old from the surf off the coast of California, and that this is Jesus. He's clinging to us, and he's rescuing us from the ocean that is threatening to drag us out to sea. And I think a lot of people resonate with that metaphor. I feel lost and confused and helpless, and it feels so good to know that Jesus swoops down and holds tight to me and doesn't let me be dragged out to sea. But there's lots of metaphors about salvation the scripture uses, and the one Paul employs today is a judicial legal metaphor. It's as if you are a prisoner standing before a judge and you are condemned. You are wearing the orange jumpsuit. You know that you're guilty. All you can hope is that maybe your public attorney, because you can't afford a real attorney, can get you off the hook, or lesser charges, or can get some amount of time reduced. You know you've committed sin. You know you've made choices, and you stand condemned. And Paul uses this language. Peter stood condemned, and he's going to talk about how Jesus justifies us. It doesn't mean we haven't committed these sins, but that we have been legally absolved of our guilt. It's a beautiful metaphor. So for people who feel lost and confused and chaotic, it's good to think that Jesus rescues us. But people who feel like, but I've messed up, I've done wrong, I've made mistakes, I am condemned, it's good for you to hear that Jesus absolves you, that you're justified. That's a wonderful metaphor for us to live into and understand. Because we don't feel lost and confused. We deliberately made the choices that got us into trouble. Condemned. Anyway, back to the juicy story. What did Peter do? What did Cephas do? Please spill the tea, Paul. And he's going to write it in a letter that ends up in what we call the Bible. And it's going to be there forever. Can you imagine your mistakes being recorded for everybody to learn from? Woof. All right, Galatians 2:12. This is what Paul writes. He goes, for before certain men came from James was down in Jerusalem. He was kind of one of the main figures of the church in Jerusalem. Before certain men came out of Jerusalem, he, meaning Peter, Cephas, used to eat with the Gentiles. So when they had potluck meal, when they had picnics together, they all ate together. But when these people from Jerusalem arrived, then he began to separate himself. He began to draw back and separate himself. And it says because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The circumcision group. Some of your translations will say circumcision party. Not my kind of party. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. Oh, you got to know, Barnabas was like the nicest guy. Barnabas liked everybody, and for Barnabas to get dragged away in this, like, the issue among Christians, like, you know it's gotten bad. And so Paul says, I confronted Peter to his face. Now, I'm curious, what did Peter tell himself? Antioch, where all this is happening, is a Gentile area. And there's a lot of Gentile, non-Jewish Christians. And of course, You're all sitting in a room together and having a good time and eating a potluck meal together. When Peter began to separate himself from Gentile Christians, and he began to live in this this religiously motivated racism, what did he tell himself? What was the narrative in his head? I think if it were me, I would be tempted to be like, this whole circumcision thing, it's a hot button issue. There's lots of strong feelings on both sides. If we're going to have a potluck meal, let's keep everybody separate. We all like different foods anyway, so we'll just have the Jewish meal over here and the Gentile meal over here, and everybody will be happy, and there'll be no problems, and it'll all be smooth and easy. I think he was probably thinking this is just a way to keep the peace, or at least that's what he's telling himself. Or maybe Peter, and this is probably what I would have done, is, man, I don't want to have that conversation with people. That would be hard. It'd be hard to get into this topic. It gets people all wound up. I mean, in fact, isn't it more kind not to bring it up so we don't create a lot of anxiety and angst? So when other people when Jewish people from Jerusalem come into town, I don't want to create awkward situations. I don't want to have to put anybody through anything. So, in fact, I'm sparing the Gentile Christians from having to feel tension. So let's just keep everybody separate. No big deal. Let's just keep it calm. And people might say, Peter, have you changed your beliefs? You at one point thought that Gentiles were freely accepted into the kingdom. And Peter would say, no, nothing like that. Everybody's still accepted by Jesus. We're just trying to keep the peace. We're just trying to help everybody get along. Let's help everybody get along by not getting together. That's what he was thinking. And that's the kind of way we think. Sometimes we build walls, call them boundaries, so that we don't actually have to forgive people. We push people away and say, well, I can't actually handle them. And I understand there may be room for that for a time and for a moment, but anytime we're inclined to separate from fellow believers, it's because the enemy has got in and is starting to pull things apart. It happens within churches, and it happens within sister churches and fellow churches. Well, I can't go there anymore because they did this and I don't like that, so I'm going to go to the church that agrees with me and that I like and where I feel comfortable. And it's not because those people aren't Christians, it's just because I'm not comfortable worshiping in that environment. I just need to do what's right for me and my family. Baloney. What you need to do is reconcile with fellow Christians. That's what you need to do. You need to get in a room and not leave until you realize that you're both part of the kingdom. That's what you need to do, and that's what Peter didn't do, and I totally get it. I totally understand. I'm there. I'm a guy who loves a good non-confrontation. I have a PhD in beating around the bush. I'm excellent at it. But you know what Paul calls it? He calls it for what it is. He says, Peter was afraid. It was fear. And that fear is what drives wedges between Christians. It's fear. It's fear of the hard work of reconciliation and forgiveness and love and unity. It's hard work to be unified. I've told you this before, but it's hard work in a diverse room such as ours, whether it's politically or philosophically or religiously diverse. It's hard work to keep all this together. I remember, and by the way, fear cuts both ways. There have been several times in my ministry, and I won't tell you details, but it's not scandalous to say this, but there have been several times in my ministry where the same choice, one decision, prompted criticism from people saying that decision was too liberal, and prompted criticism from other people saying that decision, same decision, was too conservative. And it is really hard to find that line where we can all be together because you've got people on both sides. Sometimes when people say stories like that, they say, well, I must be doing something right if everybody's mad at me. That's not how I felt. I felt like I was doing everything wrong. It's so hard to find that line where you're doing something that you think is good for everybody, and it's going to alienate people. It's going to, and it's so hard to make those decisions because fear cuts both ways. Fear will encourage you to give into culture, and fear will encourage you to give into tradition when it's not healthy for the future of the church. Fear cuts both ways. It's hard. I want you to see what Paul says next because I think it's critical to everything he's talking about. This is Galatians chapter 2, verse 14. He says, when I witnessed that they, Peter and others, were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel. Remember, we started talking about the gospel as this free gift, no strings attached. But Paul says, but the gospel creates a pathway for you to live. I saw that they were not acting in line with what the gospel forms and develops in our lives. When I saw that, I said to Cephas, my buddy Cephas, my friend Peter, I said to him in front of everybody. Imagine that. Imagine how many phone calls and emails I would get if I stood up here and I'd be like, you know, folks, Steve has not been living right. He will not drink coffee. He thinks tea is better. And he thinks those of us who drink coffee are weak. He stands condemned. If I called Steve out for something, Steve is above reproach. Well, maybe you should ask Tina, but for the most part, Steve's above reproach. If I called him out for something, it would make this gathering super uncomfortable, right? It was super uncomfortable. If I called any of you out for anything, I can't think of anything bad about any of you at all, but if I did, if I could, it would be super uncomfortable. But he says, I called Peter and others out in front of everybody because what Peter was doing was affecting everybody. So what Peter needed to be corrected in front of everybody. He says, you're a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, meaning your relationship with God is facilitated through Jesus, just like all the Gentiles, and not like a Jew. How is it that you're now forcing Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? What are you doing, Peter? You have lost hold. Jesus was holding on to you, and you're letting him slip out of your grasp. You stand condemned. This line is a big deal. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, this is a line that I think that we need to write in the margins of our Bibles, or that we need to write in a notebook, or you need to pull your notes app out on your phone, and you need to write it down. And then you need to go on a long, slow walk and think about your life. The ways that Jesus has granted you something, no strings attached, but is our life conforming, not out of obligation, out of freedom, conforming to the truth of the gospel that God has given to everyone freely? The gospel isn't a road that we cross. It's a pathway to travel. It's not just being rescued from the waves. It's a new way to live. It's less an idea to believe than a reality that we exist in now. We exist in gospel reality now. The gospel maps out this trajectory for our lives, and it's so hard to nuance this between adding some obligation to the gospel. But the gospel will always have a downstream impact on our lives. It will always. It will always shape us and change us and transform us. It will always reorient how we see ourselves. For Peter, it should have made him less worried about the guys from Jerusalem, from James. He should have been less worried because he knows that we all stand condemned before God, and the only reason we're justified is Jesus Christ, Jew or Gentile. It should have reoriented how he saw himself, and it should transform how he saw other people. And I think it was Paul living out the gospel that caused him to confront Peter. It was Paul living out the gospel that caused him to confront his brother, his fellow apostle. But I think it was also Paul living out the gospel that encouraged him to call him Cephas and acknowledge their familiar relationship that they have. Here's what I think is true. I think every distortion of Christianity and the gospel that you've ever seen or ever experienced comes from forgetting that we have been rescued by Jesus. And that's simple truth. Every distortion comes from forgetting that. It is a disaster when married people live like they're single. That marriage is heading for some bad times. And some of you have experienced that. You've experienced a husband or wife, and they acted like they weren't married to you, and you didn't see him, and they didn't check in you. You didn't share. You were just like two people living in the same space. It's a disaster when married people forget that they're married. It's tragic when parents function like they're childless. You probably interacted with some families where you're like, you've got kids, man. You gotta make some different decisions now. You gotta grow up. You gotta be responsible. You can't function like you're childless because it's gonna be a disaster for the kids. It's an accident waiting to happen when Christians forget Jesus rescued them and they live a new life now. Jesus rescued you. Jesus plus nothing rescued you. You don't have one up on any other human being. Jesus plus nothing. My wife and I went to a Shakespeare in the Park. Well, it was technically Shakespeare in the parking lot. And it was set up in a parking lot. It was great. And it was really, really well done. I mean, it was very sparse, no sets and just very sparse costuming and everything. If you've ever watched Shakespeare, I've tried to read Shakespeare like in high school, and I'm telling you, my mind was just like, no, you are not, this is not happening. It's so hard to read. If you've ever watched a Shakespeare play, they're really enjoyable, but it's like you got to sit there and really pay attention. All right, because this is tough to follow. I mean, it's this, older English. And we watched Hamlet. You cannot be passive. You cannot pull out your phone and scroll on your phone while you take in Shakespeare and understand anything they're saying. It is a full-on, mind-engaged experience. So we're watching Hamlet, and of course Hamlet has the famous line, "To be or not to be." I've heard it. You've heard it. It's the only Shakespeare I can quote, "To be or not to be." This is Laurence Olivier in 1948, his version of it. But lots of famous actors have done it. You've probably seen it or heard it. Every famous actor has done it. Kenneth Branagh, Andrew Scott. I saw this video clip of even King Charles doing the famous soliloquy, "To be or not to be." So I'm watching. I'm fully tuned in on Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1. And Hamlet begins this soliloquy, "To be or not to be." And for the first time in my life, I'm like, whoa, that's profound. That's amazing. That's such a deep, essential truth, the whole thing. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. And I finally understood what Hamlet's saying in Shakespeare through Hamlet. Oh, do we just live life and just let the hardships of life beat us up? Or do we stand our ground and do we fight against the suffering and the hardship, knowing that it's going to shape us and transform us? And I'm sitting there with Kareen in a parking lot. Whoa. Wow. Mind blown. This is amazing. To be or not to be. And now, from now on, every time I hear that line, it's going to have a different impact on me. I'm about to read a passage of Scripture that I think has that level of reality and truth. Paul distills a spiritual reality in such a beautiful, articulate way. And it answers this question of how do we as Christians freely accept the gift that is the gospel while still allowing it to transform who we are and change us, but not out of obligation, not because we're trying to get God's attention or to earn his favor. And he writes something that, it should be hung on our walls and underlined in our Bibles and tattooed on our skin. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Galatians chapter 2. You've heard this before, but I want you to hear it in a new way. It's 2 sentences in English, 1 sentence in Greek. This is what Paul writes. Galatians 2:20. He says, "I have been crucified with Christ. And I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." Paul, is salvation a free gift? Yes, absolutely. No strings attached. Paul, should salvation transform the very essence and core of who we are? Yes, absolutely. 100%. You should be a brand new person. I want to read that one more time. I have been crucified with Christ. He's articulating a spiritual reality that is true for you. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. It's worth going on that long walk and thinking through this reality. We're not trying to Private Ryan style earn salvation in retrospect. Parents, you want your kids to appreciate everything that you provided for them as they graduate high school and move on to college. And some of you are like, yeah, I pay their tuition. I pay their gas bill. I pay their phone bill. I mean, they're fully dependent on me. While at the same time, you don't want them to grovel and beg and feel like everything matters. You want them to be appreciative while developing their own sense of identity and independence. That's what you want. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I want you to write these down, and I want you to go on a slow walk. They'll all be on the screen if you want to take a picture too. I want you to go on a slow walk and think through these questions. Number 1, what would look different if Jesus was living your life? Not you changing everything so that you can wander around deserted wilderness and pray for 40 days, but if Jesus had your job and he had your family and he was in your circumstances and he had your health issues and your health concerns, what would look different if Jesus was living your life that you live right now? The children that you have, the relatives you have, the drama that you have, what would look different if Jesus was living your life? It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Where do you live in fear of living out the gospel? What ask that God has of you creates the most fear? It's probably not eating with Gentiles when folks from Jerusalem are around, but that's what it was for Peter. Where does truly living out the gospel create the most fear? Are there changes in your lifestyle, your belief system, your relationship with God that you need to accept, but you're scared because you've understood your relationship with God to be this one way for so long? Where are you afraid of others' criticism? Where are you afraid of moving into a new reality, but you're like, yeah, but my relatives who see me a couple times a year wouldn't really understand this decision I'm making? Where do you live in fear of that change you might need to make? And number 3, what decisions or where are you tempted to earn your salvation instead of live the gospel? Where are you tempted to say like, see God, look what I did. Aren't you proud of me? And God's like, it was already a gift. Of course I'm proud of you, but not because you did that. Where are you tempted to earn your salvation instead of to live the gospel? What would it look like for you to just step away from that mentality of earning and understand that it's been given to you? We're going to sing a song in closing called What a Beautiful Name. And after we sing the song, I'm going to come back up. We're going to invite our seniors up on stage. We're going to pray for them, and we're just going to pray that they will live in this gospel reality in ways that we have wrestled with our entire lives, but they live this new reality, that they go out into college and their careers knowing that they have been given this good gift by God, and they don't have to live in the shadow of this angst of trying to figure it out and earn it, but they can live in the reality that God is going to transform them.